We often hear that the Indian Constitution was written in precisely 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, starting back in 1946. But what if I told you that was literally just the final chapter? The true origins of this massive, complex document actually stretch back over 250 years. And the crazy part? It doesn't begin with visionary politicians or freedom fighters. It begins with a ruthless British corporation.
All right, let's jump straight into our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the initial corporate startup phase, the massive shift from trade to taxes, the inevitable greed crisis, the first major crackdown in 1773, how they had to go back and fix the flaws, and finally, Pitt's dual control. So let's start at the very beginning with the corporate startup phase, running from 1600 to 1726, and look at exactly how a simple merchant group became an absolute monopoly.
To really understand this evolution, picture this. It's 1599, and a group of merchants forms a trading company simply to rival the French and the Portuguese. Then, on December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I grants them a royal charter. Now, this wasn't just some basic business license, it was a 15-year ironclad monopoly. That meant absolutely no other British company was allowed to trade in India. As you can see, that monopoly eventually shifts and fades, ultimately leading to the total abolition of company rule by 1858.
But look at their original hierarchy. It's wild, right? It was run exactly like a modern mega corporation. Up at the top, you had the proprietors, basically shareholders who put in a $500 minimum investment. They elected a 24-member court of directors. Right beneath them were the governors of their key outposts, Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. And what's truly mind-blowing is that by 1726, these local governors were granted the legal power to make their own local laws. A private, profit-driven company was literally drafting legislation for its Indian territories.
Okay, moving into our second phase, from 1757 to 1765. This is where we get a massive plot twist.
Through incredibly aggressive military victories, like the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and Buxar in 1764, this company mutated from merchants into actual conquerors. Through the Treaty of Allahabad in 1765, they secured what's called Diwani rights. What does that actually mean? Well, it gave them the sovereign power to directly collect revenue and taxes from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Suddenly, overnight, a trading corporation was acting like a sovereign government, aggressively extracting taxes directly from millions of people. The main architect of this era, Robert Clive, set up a highly cynical system in Bengal known as dual governance. It worked like this. The local Indian ruler, the Nawab, was handed all the heavy headaches of day-to-day administration, maintaining law and order, fixing public issues, you name it. And the company? They took absolutely zero administrative responsibility but hoarded all the tax money. I mean, it was brilliant for them. All profit, zero accountability. Which brings us straight into phase 3, the greed crisis. Or, as it's better known, rich employees and a bankrupt company. You see, with massive power came entirely unchecked corruption. You had unsupervised employees let loose in a wealthy nation with no oversight whatsoever, completely blurring the line between corporate business and outright theft. And this created a massive contradiction that absolutely shocked the British Parliament. Think about it. How does a monopoly company go bankrupt when its own employees are returning home as multimillionaires? The staff was getting filthy rich off bribes and private side hustles, yet the company itself was operating at a huge loss, practically begging the British government for a bailout loan. To put a human face on this staggering level of greed, £400,000. That is the estimated fortune that Warren Hastings amassed. He arrived in India as a mere 18-year-old clerk and left unimaginably wealthy. These men lived like absolute royalty back in England, earning the nickname Nabobs, all while the company they worked for was drowning in debt. Well, British Prime Minister Lord North wasn't just going to hand over a bailout blindly. He sent a secret committee to investigate exactly what was going on. And their findings? Totally damning. Yes, the company was in massive debt. Yes, employee corruption was completely out of control. But most importantly, they warned that without immediate government intervention to regulate these rogue employees, Britain risked losing India entirely, just like they had lost their grip on America. So that desperate realization triggers phase 4, the very first crackdown, the Regulating Act of 1773. This is actually the very first piece of constitutional regulation in India. Over just 11 fast-paced years, the British Parliament fired off a rapid succession of laws: the Regulating Act, the Settlement Act, and Pitt's India Act. They were gradually but very firmly tightening the governmental leash on a corporate entity that had grown way larger than the state itself.
The 1773 Act really brought the hammer down. It placed a strict, complete ban on private trade, bribes, and gifts for company employees. It forced the corporate court of directors to report their revenues directly to the British finance and foreign ministers, finally introducing some much-needed financial transparency. Crucially, it upgraded the Bengal governor, Warren Hastings, to the role of Governor-General and gave him a 4-member council to assist him. By the way, if you're studying this for an exam, just remember the mnemonic trick Como Rich France to recall their names: Clavering, Monson, Richard, and Philip Francis.
Now, don't miss this point because it's absolutely critical. The 1773 Act marks the absolute first step towards centralization in India. By legally subordinating the Bombay and Madras presidencies to the Governor-General in Bengal, the concrete foundation for a centrally governed India was poured. The federal structure we see in the country today, its deepest roots are right here.
But of course, it wasn't perfect. Which brings us to Phase 5, fixing the flaws with the 1781 Settlement Act. You see, the 1773 Act had a massive structural flaw. It established a Supreme Court in Calcutta in 1774, but Parliament totally forgot to define its jurisdiction versus the power of the Governor-General. It caused total chaos. So, the 1781 Settlement Act stepped in to act as a referee, clearly splitting their powers. The Governor-General and his council were made completely exempt from Supreme Court jurisdiction for their official acts. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court handled private corporate crimes, uniquely using separate Hindu and Muslim acts based on the offender's religion. And honestly, it's fascinating. This legal immunity granted to the Governor-General for official duties is practically identical to the legal protections the President of India enjoys today.
Finally, we reach Phase 6, Pitt's dual control in 1784, separating trade from politics. By 1784, the new British Prime Minister, William Pitt, decided enough was enough. Profit-driven merchants had absolutely no business running wars or dictating foreign policy. So Pitt's India Act created a sophisticated dual government system. They perfectly split the functions. The old court of directors, who were appointed by the shareholders, were told to stick strictly to commercial and trade affairs, just focus on the money. Meanwhile, a brand new 6-member board of control, appointed directly by the British monarch and including state ministers, took over all political, military, and treaty decisions. And tucked right into the text of that 1784 Act was a massive legal milestone. It was the very first time the company's territories were officially referred to in law as British possessions. The mask of the trading company was finally slipping, and the British Empire had formally stepped onto the stage. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. If a modern megacorporation gained the unchecked power to collect taxes and wage actual wars today, what kind of constitution would we have to invent to stop them? It completely shifts your perspective when you realize that the deep historical roots of India's constitutional law were quite literally built, step by step, to regulate and contain out-of-control corporate greed. Thanks for hanging out and learning with me today, and keep questioning the history behind the rules.